Well, so welcome back. This is one about it's picking up on several little things that are semi-connected, and but you can see it's color, pre-mixing of color, and visual order and stuff, and more. Just a number of odd things that sort of come together and under a sort of a standard way of working type of video. So thank you all for your subscribing, sharing, comments. Thank you for being there, and keep those questions coming and the discussion points coming. Appreciate it. All right, definitely keep sharing those, getting your friends to subscribe. I had a very nice meeting this week with a lovely lady who said she works for Pixar. Had worked her, spent her life working for Pixar, had some wonderful stories to tell, and but had watched with the idea of coming back into painting more, watched all of my videos. So I know many, if not most of you have. I really appreciate that, and I really do hope that the benefit is as good for all of you as it is for expressly for some of you. It's gratifying, to put it simply. Let's read the. This is the first of. It's going to be 4 questions. I don't think I have a ton of pictures necessary here. Several starts by me that I think you haven't seen yet, but answering some of these questions. So, Paul L says, I once heard you say that in our way of working, premixing colors is not advisable. Can you explain more about why not? Now, premixing colors, you see people with palettes and they'll mix colors and they'll mix right down through various values of the same color and that sort of thing, fill up their palette with those. I don't know how many other forms of premixing people talk about, but that's one. I don't use it. Actually, I've never even much explored it. I saw that it was being done in possibly the Riley classes at the Art Students League, but something about it didn't interest me. Curious how that is with when you're studying. You know, something strikes you as being, you know, the choice way, the better choice. Two roads divide in a wood, and sorry, you can only be one traveler. Can you explain more about why not? I think our eyes can. I'm going to go through this and I'll go back to his points. I think our eyes can compare the colors on the palette to the ones on the rectangle well enough, don't you? Don't you? Is that more a matter of best practices as you've experienced them? I would think that when you're beginning, as I am, that not pre-mixing colors may lead to a terrible, muddy, thick mess. It sounds like the voice of experience. Are there ways to use the color study process to avoid making these kinds of mistakes, or is it just a matter of time and practice? Now, the color study thing that we talked about last week, it's entirely about developing color schemes, or as I've said, if he means it this way, the color study, which is the beginning of our video, of our starts. I refer to our starts as color studies. It's all about hitting the note, and the drawing comes around. It comes into it as well, but it amounts to being a color study, and especially the way I promote it. So if you keep thinking about that, tying on with last week, but so I once heard you say that in our way of working, pre-mixing colors is not advisable. We do pre-mix. So I've got to make this very clear. We pre-mix, but we pre-mix one note. So you want to start with a note. You're looking at a note in nature. You do your best to match the note, and you put it up on the canvas. And that's the end of your pre-mixing, okay? Now, after that, on the canvas, all the corrections are being done on the canvas. So once you have it on the canvas, you say, oh, that should have been a little more red, yellow, blue, and so on, right? So that's the extent, but we do pre-mix to that extent, okay? I do, okay? Keep on remembering, I can't speak for everybody in the Boston School, but I'm talking to you about what's been successful for me, and I do like your point there, what I found to be best practices. And these are all up to me about efficiencies, getting to the best with the least struggle and time and all those things. So, but the other, if I really fully understood those guys and had put it to use, you really should ask others why they do what they do. But if they're not getting our kind of color, that may be a factor. And I know that some of the guys that come out of the Riley method are noticeably not getting what we call full spectrum color as when they paint from life. So, but I'm not going to tell you that there aren't exceptions, or in fact, I might just be wrong. So relax about that. So his point is, I think our eyes can compare the colors on the palette to the ones on the rectangle well enough. Well, you mix on the palette, you see a note, you mix it on the palette, and there you are comparing those. Then you set it on the canvas, and now you can compare nature to the canvas, right? Unfortunately, that's only the barest beginning, because from that point on, it's all adjustments. So this may match that. That's a sight-size model, right? But as I've said before, when you're painting the white side of a cast facing a window, that white can't be matched on your canvas. You can never hit that note. So now something else is happening, which means this white is not that white. So you can match them, but you can't match them. So the whole discussion changes, doesn't it? Because you've got to paint with the white, as it were, that you have. And by the way, if it's a colored white, then it's going to be even darker than the white of your canvas. And that's a crucial thing to the impressionist, or to the guy who wants the full spectrum operation, happening at once. So all dark blacks have color, whites have color, and so it matters, for example, that you don't get inky with your blacks, because you won't be able to see the color. And if you can see the color, and I don't mean when you're staring at it, but when you're seeing the whole. And remember, that's how to keep seeing the color, keep seeing the thing as a whole. Look at it at the corner and sides of your eyes, and you'll see the color way better, but also keep it in a context modality. So what color is that when you're looking at the whole? So the first part of our palette, the reason we're going all over the place at once, is because we're trying to find out where we're going to be living. We're trying to find out what color relations, whether dark is dark and light is lights, can be, and then what the most chromatic notes must be, given what our palette's limits are, and and this whole structure of where we're going to live. And so you're searching out your color scheme right there on the spot. And it requires continuous adjustment. But I find that because the screen is full of all these colors, that the adjusting on the palette is the thing. That's what you must be skilled at doing. And it's not, it comes to you quickly. Now, he says, I think that when you're beginning, as I am, that pre-mixing colors, not doing it, may lead to a terrible, muddy, thick mess. Well, this is very much one of the points you have to make. When I lay in a canvas, I make sure I put down a solid note so I can see it, but then I make sure I use it up. In other words, I don't make big piles and stick them on there and then try to adjust the color into a thick mess, because you will wind up with a thick mess. So that's one of those crucial things, to mix only as thickly as you need to have a solid sense of the color, but so that you can easily adjust it with the next note, and with just enough paint again, and not some big fat mass in the next note, right? So that's one of those sources of the big thick mess that you're talking about. I'm hoping that can come across to you, but I have not found that pre-mixing has anything to do with this. Now, what you have on the palette, though, by the way, is a form of pre-mixing if you're using the palette wisely. So when you mix this note and you set it up on the canvas, there's that note sitting there. So from that point forward, when you're trying to adjust what's on the canvas, you mix right next to that note that you already have on the palette, I meant to say. You mix right next to that note the color you're going to put in next. And what I mean is you mix it to the right value. If you have in your puddle there the value finally is right, then you can mix next to it, make it more chromatic, but you have the value solved. So that's the way we use the palette. So in that sense, we are also pre-mixing, but we're not setting up a string of color values to do it, okay? Okay, we've talked about this before, so you can pick up on that at some point at your convenience. I don't know of any way to make the process, it's just one you have to learn to do. You have to learn how much paint to put down, how much not to put down. And by the way I'm putting it down, if you watch the videos, I'm not putting it down in little teeny chunks of broken color the way Brackman taught, the way evidently Monet primarily worked. I am putting it down in fairly larger chunks, but with the idea of more subdivision later. And that's a point that comes up in a minute. Okay, so let me leave it at that for a second. So this is just to show you what we do. This is the spotting of the colors out of there. Here's a color here. Now, what I've done is I've made sure I spread that around. So I think of this first phase of hitting color notes as filling the interstices of the canvas. And that's just, I think, that's a way of getting out of thinking this is much of a thing. I'm just filling the holes in the canvas, right? But you see that I have hit some notes and then I smear it around and I say, really, I use it up so that there's no piles of thick stuff there. I try to put down only enough in the first blob that when I cross-hatch it a couple times, it'll get to a nice viscosity and thinness. It'll be very easy to admix into, okay? But this is there is no note that's not been hit here. There wasn't an attempt to do this, and then a correction when I had, say, another note that seemed like maybe somewhat like it, to have these notes related to each other. So this adjusting is going all the time. But it's not to stuff I'm looking at on the palette. It's adjusting to stuff I'm seeing up in front of me. So the adjusting is back and forth. When I'm hitting this note, I find it's lighter than this one. Those sorts of things, right? So I make those adjustments right away on the spot. But yeah, that's an interesting question. I'll come back to this picture with some other discussion. Now, Willy M asks, he says, I understand what you're saying about hitting color notes and developing the image with relationships and light, but I'm curious about the actual application of a color while painting something that may be complicated or diverse in color in one area. If one area varies in tone color, do you try to find and use a local color before developing it further, or do you meticulously try to hit the notes in the position they're in? I can see it being a challenge to develop form while trying to place the note perfectly. Yeah, and I would say to you that that is a significantly more, the way you describe it in this little piecemeal hitting notes, I would say it's more like what we did with Brackman. But let me go back to that picture, because the question of local color is an interesting one, but what I'm doing around here is I'm hitting these notes, and you can see this note is, I'm looking at some portion of this, maybe that spot right there. And I'm gonna say, or something that just takes up a lot of space there. So I can have this note to talk to this note. You see how big those are. Now, every note in the canvas ultimately probably, or is susceptible of having multiple subdivisions, right? But I think that way about it. I think about, I really want broken color, and I really want movements, which is about what subdivisions is. Now, if you're talking about the complexity of stuff, like in an area like this, you can see my first venture over there is just a large green note. Now, one of the things I do in there that's busiest like that, I typically try to, as you see here, to just make it hectic so it looks a little busy. I'm not trying to draw it, though. You can see that it's dark light a little bit. So it presents a sense of this sort of what I would call texture. But that's as near as I get to it, but I'm really only after this larger note, or if there's some big movement in that note, I'm after that. So the answer to your question is very straightforward. You could, if you want to call it the local color, but it's the larger color. Now, local color has a whole different meaning for me. You know, local color is the color my hand is, the way I was taught this. And so you would say, what color is my hand? And you scientifically put that color up there on the canvas. The impressionist is saying, what color is my hand in this setting? And so local color is an irrelevant thing, or in fact, it becomes a no-no. You're not trying to paint the actual color on an orange. You're trying to paint what the orange is in a context, right? It's going to be the orange in the room, but it may not be the orange of the local color if you were to take the peel and put it side by side on the screen. So I don't much like that word local color, because all the colors are local ultimately, right? They're local to their area, even the broken, even the spots. So that's what's happening is there's going to be multiple shifts of color in many places. So in some spot, like right there, you can see that this is bluer and this is similar value, but yellower, maybe a little richer. So these are the kinds of movements. And if there's a little movement as it gets down here, it gets a little bit lighter. All that stuff is what we're putting down with the secondary additional notes in the construct. So it rather applies a model like the Impressionist, but it does it not from a big, fat, flat base, but from a larger general note. And then as time goes by and you're correcting notes, you're always doing it with broken color, with the idea of incorporating the vivacity, I guess would be a good word, the life that comes when you don't overmix your colors. Now, if you're talking about a spot like this right here, once I've made this note and this note, the articulation of this is the third activity. That is what I need to know, is whether this and that make this color phenomena that I see over here. And that's my job right there at that spot. And yes, for a second, it's, you might say local. It's this color right at the edge, and it's this color right at the edge that I'm really trying to get. And Benson refers to that. So if you haven't seen his notes, take a look at that. But he refers to them as two flat notes side by side, right? One of them cutting the other. They don't stay flat, right? It's not a flat thing. But for a minute, just that part of this value that touches on this one over here, and as much of this one is needed, is what we're really trying to get, is the exact effect right there. And it's a color plus value plus edge. The effect is caused by color, sharpness of edge, and contrast as well. I'm going to look at that question again in case I haven't answered it, but I think that's probably the best I can do with that. Yeah. But can we leave it at that? Come back to me if that doesn't work for you, okay? Because that really is my best answer for you. Let's see, does this one answer it any better? Yeah, I would say I get the same answer out of this. You can see the places where when you make this mark here and this one here, once you articulate that what happens along that edge, it may be susceptible of shifts as it goes along. You're right, certainly logical that it might be. And by the way, these things are shot on wildly different days. I'm not quite that bad at color. And who knows what of the day, but what happens right when these meet? Now you can call that, if you want to, the local color, the immediate color side by side with the other immediate color in your mind, it sounds like that's what you might mean by local color. And it certainly is, if that's what you mean, what I'm doing. I don't particularly care to use that word for the reasons I said. But what you can see I'm doing if I'm laying this in is I'm trying to get a color movement. You can see I have it going from golden to getting a little redder and darker to turning a bit blue down here. Nothing in mind, but it's just a beginning thing. But there's a movement, but you can see it's not looking for every little note here and here and here and here and here and building it up that way. But that would have been what we did with Brackman. And I wouldn't tell anybody not to do it. Search it out. It's actually a very useful thing to have done, to find out what that's all about and do an entire picture that way, work it right up. I really do recommend people try other ways of working so they can fully understand the benefits when they find best practices, when you get to other places. If you haven't done these things, the last thing I want to do is just stand there with, even though I've said what I just said about the Riley method, I don't particularly want to stand there with methods that are getting some kind of results and not know what they're doing. I think the Riley one turned me off. I didn't particularly want to do it because it was the formula for making the figure was so, I don't know what we would say, maybe mechanized, it was a standardized formula. And I've never liked that about drawing. I really prefer to draw what I see as soon as I see it. And it's old school stuff, I suppose you could say. But you can see various color shifts all the time, right from the beginning, color shifts. There's an area here that you can see this more lit here and then turns redder as it goes up here. Those things are happening fairly soon. For one thing, I needed to have something like a top up here to establish. And the second part of it would have been, because the value changed, I might have been using this for leftmost point or who knows what. So I must have had reasons to actually try to articulate what this was doing to that. By the way, it's a good thing to notice when you're looking at these things that these are, and by the way, these days are just totally different days. Just look at the canvas, look at the light on the easel. These are very different days, a way cooler shot from the camera or a cooler day. So, but I do go for hitting the note as best I can right up front and right away. And to do so, when I see the adjustments, I do it with broken color every bit as much as I can, but not with broken values. My objective is to try to get the values right by using the palette for reference, as I said, and matching that down there, the note that I know is a match for that value. And then if it needs more blue or more chroma, mixing it and just laying it, just adjusting with it. This thing's going to fight me today. So let's see what the next question was, if I haven't lost this all. In reference to starts, would you go about beginning with spatial relationships or go after the visual order, contrast, and edges first? Or does it only make sense to be done in unison? I like that you concluded that it only makes sense to be done in unison. And by the way, for any of you guys who haven't seen it yet, I recommend you go to the YouTube and find this GBA time-lapse video of me doing, as you can see, 90 seconds of a 30-hour, 40-hour painting. But you can go there and see that, and you'll see how I work. But even as I look at that, I can assure you that there's a certain amount of both. But let me just say again, to outline the process, what you will see me doing is spotting colors around. If they're big, I'll tend to fill the space up a little bit more, and I'll try to make the lights, maybe make them even too big so I can draw with the darks. But I'm spotting around significant color notes, trying to get the color scheme set on the page. And so that's the a priori thing. But the next thing I do is I try to locate, so I say there's a step down, right? The next step is not placement on the page, it's improving the color by context. What do I mean by that? Well, that means when I go up here to hit this note to make the spatial, and remember we are moving that way, but we're first moving to the effect. So we go up here and bring this color to this one. If I had this, I would say bring this color to this one. You see that they're floating apart. I'm sort of anticipating what they will do when they meet. But I'm bringing this color to this one, and I'm articulating the effect. And I'm trying to get in the right place, but I don't put that first. I put getting the effect first because I find that the more true you make these effects, let's say the look of nature at these points, the more they place themselves, through your viewfinder, the more they find their own place. And so I'm articulating these as best I can and saying, let that be the top. And that's what you're seeing here. Well, these exits, you can also see, are relatively articulate. I don't know why I don't have the actual original painting on here. Usually I try to show that. But you can see these points here are already so worked up that they may never have been touched again. These are exit points. So these are all landmarks in this painting. So at each of these places, I'm trying to find this landmark, but first I find the effect. And when I say I'm finding the effect, I say to myself, Paul, you've got to finish getting the color right. Because when you finally get this in the right place, I want the color relation of this meeting that, just the way I spoke of a second ago. Do you follow that? So yes, I really do prioritize the effect, but it's because it's still part of the color discussion, right? And then the second part is because it actually enables you, the more like it is, the easier it is to see where it actually goes on the canvas. So, and you can see that in lots of places. What I've done here really powered up the look of this thing. Well, other areas are pretty vague. So I'm not going all over the place and getting the drawing done right. I'm going around through the painting and getting effects right that deliver me nice placement. So these exits are nice placement. This exit over here, nice placement. So the top here or this whole side running down here, good placement. Aspects of this, obviously, I'm using this point. So is that a landmark for this travel? Who knows? Who knows? But that's the way your mind works, right? So this whole spatial thing is about points and angles. It's about the big proportion and gesture, or whatever the greatest abstraction is here. You can call it the triangle if you like to. So you see what I mean? It's all about those things in very big ways. So I am what I call sending out scouts. Top and bottom are scouts. They just float up here and you float some things maybe down here. Or you might even just say, well, I'm going to call this, well, I don't know what I would have called. You might say, when I do the bottom, if I don't have a very strong one, I typically would bring a couple things in to bear. So it might be both this and this. Say, let that be the bottom of this thing. But I'll try to articulate those points and give them the look of nature right there on the spot. Get their effect, their contrast, their color combination, plus their edge. And they're just there to be moved. And that when I move them, I try to make them a little bit better than last time. So I review them, again, in the great context of things. Just remember, not just the color relations have to be good, but the placement relations, the spatial relations all have to be good too. And then, of course, the effect relations is a big deal. So you see this being the most brilliant effect maybe, but it's certainly in competition with this one, to some extent that one, and then lesser this one. By the way, this brilliant light here is an effect too. It's just not a square-edged effect like that. So talk about his light effect. Ang specifically talks about the importance of that effect. And he doesn't use the word highlight there. He's talking about the fullest light, the most, the strongest, I guess you'd say, light in the value scheme. So let me just review that again. What have I missed? To start, would you go about beginning with spatial relations, or would you go after visual order, contrast edges first? Okay, but in that sense, though, you see, it's so subtle, but you'd say you're doing it in unison, because what we're really doing is we're going around the canvas. Remember, I do the star thing. You're down here to be up here, to be over here, to be over here. And you're not crawling your way there. You're jumping, jumping, jumping. As Gamma would say, hop, hop, hop. It's a Boston School conversation. You got to be all over the place at once. And so, yeah, and by the way, it pays off if you read the quotes of these guys. Read what Benson says and others whenever you can get your hands on them. And I do have some of those things, so do ask me for them. By the way, guys, feel free to. I'm not trying to. I don't want to be the hoarder of information. My whole objective is to get the earth covered with this information. I don't know. It's just a joy to me. So it's not good, not bad, not anything. Just that's what I do. So ask for it when you want something. If I have it, you'll get it. By the way, somebody out there has been asking for the Twilight of Painting. If you're listening to me, I have it, and now I'm trying to get it planted. I'm trying to find a place to put it where you can go and get it from, because it's too big for me to ship to you by email. So do get back to me and ask me about it. But yes, in that one sense, though, we're all over the place. So at the beginning, you're doing colors, you're all over the place at once. And then when you're doing the effects, you're getting effect relations to each other. But at the same time, in that way that you're saying it, very nearly in the same time or within seconds, you're also getting the placement of the canvas. You have two worlds operating at that point. That's the great spatial relations that Meldrum talks about. I'm sorry, the great effect relations. And then the great spatial relations, which is the ovoid model, the height to width, the gesture, all that sort of stuff. They're both rather in front of you. Now you have to deal with both, okay? And by the way, you still have to keep dealing with color. Color never goes away. And the more context you get, the more you're going to have to correct these colors, which is the reason why you don't even think about fixing colors for sure, okay? They're always susceptible of improvement upward. And of course, of creating more continuity, more sense of a relationship to the whole. All right, I think there was one more question. All right. I took a landscape class from a colleague, Ron Beamer, I don't know that name, but he had a great analogy for critiquing our first block-ins of a motif. He'd look at a canvas covered in blobs, representing trees and bushes, and say, okay, this is the Lucy show, where's Lucy? He'd then go through options, meaning you decide what Lucy is, and then everything else had to be subservient to that focal point. He might say, you could make this large tree in the middle right Lucy, and the stump below it Ricky, but that means you'd have to downplay the blooming bush in front of the bottom left. I know it's a humorous way of analyzing a painting, but is it similar to what you mean by creating visual order? Now, I should pause there a second. I don't really tell you to create visual order. I tell you to observe the visual order. And I tell you to paint the visual order. That is, say, paint things in the order in which they project. Again, back to the Meldrum discussion. I guess what I'm asking is there usually one obvious visual order, or given the same still life setup, is it up to the individual artist to each create their own? Yeah, so I really doubt that Ron meant that you decide, but he might have, I don't know. But you don't decide what Lucy is. It's in front of you. That's why you blur your eye. You blur your eye to see what Lucy is. You go to see where the power is. Everything else is less than that, right? That's by the very definition of when you blur your eyes, it's to find out who isn't in the game in the first instance, or in the first screen. We're talking about the bas relief. That what we're looking for is that first level of heads sticking out, or corners of buildings that are all at this level, not the middle level, not the back level, but it's projectiveness, not real. It's projective to the eye. It's light projective. You follow that? So anytime you're looking at nature, nature has those things. In fact, your organizing of your choice of spots to paint from has already taken that into consideration. You're placing the most powerful effect in wisely, because it's going to dominate your canvas. You're deciding how big to make it in relation to the whole. How tight, even how tall or wide the painting is. These are all functions hugely of that power spot. Okay, so Lucy, if you like, but no, we don't create the visual order. We establish the visual order of nature. Remember, we're impressionists. We're painting the beauty of what we see, and that really means managing stuff in context. And the power of the visual impression, that is, say, the order of that power is context that gives the truth to what we're painting. That's one of the aspects of it. So I guess what I'm asking is there usually one obvious visual order? Yeah, well, in a single setup, it's the same visual order for everybody. There's no question about that. So you're not creating your own. You're not inventing it. However, of course, when you're painting a painting from your imagination, that's an entirely different game, and I keep on trying to remind you of that. The impressionist is painting, drawing forth the magic of the impression, which really requires obedience to the truth of the value relations, of the effect relations, of the chromal relations. You're following that, right? And in their great context. So that's what it means, the relations, but the big impression. So, but when you're making a picture up out of your head, you have that opportunity. Sometimes it's given what the lightest light must be, but there are other ways to power up an area. Like the busiest area, talking about center of interest, the area of the most striking silhouettes, or busy things, rich colored things. There's a lot of things that make up a spot that may dominate the eye. It's not limited to the power lights. But that's when you're making a picture from scratch, when you're designing out of your head. And we, in my composition workshop, we talk about those sorts of things. Has everything to do with the idea of spotting, what we call spotting, which is the distribution of lights and darks. So yeah, I think we've covered that. We did. Do I have another picture? I don't think so. So these are studies done by me, demonstrations for students, but I think it covers the question. The visual order is. Let's just look at this one for a second. So the powerful stuff, the visual order. This is Lucy. The way you're talking about it, this area here is Lucy. This is strong, but this is dominating, right? It's not a great setup. I wouldn't tell you that in that one sense, but it is powerful. It was fun to look at. But you could even talk about this being more interesting. It has more different things, So maybe you think of your center as being this larger area. I often do think of it that way. But that would mean that this, for example, it might be strong, but it's not as powerful, not as big, not as whatever. And this is weaker. Well, the order of strength. So this is so to speak, the things that make silhouettes. This is about as weak as it gets, right? There's a real shape, but you can hardly read it. It's down in a class, like maybe with this, or anyway, weak stuff. And so the Lucy thing is all the power things, like this is a power thing. This is a power thing. But the area at large dominates everything. And yet there's a player over here that really wants to say, and what about me? So you can have Lucy and Lucy 2, or Lucy sub 1 or something. Paintings go all over the place that way. But there's dominance is a big deal in painting. So if you're saying that we don't paint this to match that in the visual impression world, for sure, right? It just wouldn't work. By the way, the world of chiaroscuro is a little like that. In the bright lights, and you have where the areas where there's brights and you have dark around it, these high contrast areas, they pop forward and reach your eye clearly, right? And in these weaker areas, they're more obscure. The contrasts make it so. The weakness of the contrast make it so. Now let's see, did the other one have a Lucy moment? Yeah, this is a pretty good one for Lucy, right? There's Lucy. That area is what he's talking about, dominant area. Doesn't mean it's necessarily a center of interest, but it most frequently is tied to the center of interest. So this larger area could be considered the power center. There's a lot of fun stuff in this picture, but when you get into here and you have busy shapes and you have color changes and shifts and you have this whole thing circling around it, there's something that keeps powering this up, plus the brightest lights. So, but that's in the class of, as you look at it visually, you'd say, oh, there's Lucy. And that's where I like what Ron is saying. But you can then count your way down in terms of effects. You could say, is that Lucy too? Is it coming down? Is this next? Well, is this next? Or whatever. And you can count your way down. Maybe of all the very bright ones, if you blow your eyes down, maybe this will still be included, but it'd be the weakest of them all. You know what I mean? But that's the sort of the way you're doing it. And when I go around, I am trying, like this lay in here, I am trying to establish the power of the light relationships. And this is the painting ultimately isn't quite as light as that. That photograph and this photograph weren't taken at the same time. But same problem we have with that, with what cameras do. But nevertheless, there's an order, there's something going on here where there's a conversation between this brightness and that less brightness. But the impact of this is pretty significant. And in some ways, it's stronger than this up here, the impact of this. just simply the sheer cutout, the black on, sort of the black on lighter quality of it. But you can see, I mean, on this one, it would appear that I've seriously missed on here, so I don't know. I'm not defending it because I can't tell what was going on with this shot. But anyway, you follow that idea. So, but there's Lucy. All these guys, there's weaknesses. They're very, very weak in here. There's stuff, but you can't hardly see it. It's all, if you blow your eye, this is all the dark. This whole thing is the dark, This is weak. This stuff is relatively weak, In some places you can't see what's happening. The weakest of all. So there's farther and farther back you get. But yeah, that idea of establishing the prominence, the dominance of one spot is a big deal. And then, of course, in an imaginative painting, you also want to have dominance of one area over all the rest. Just a common sense kind of thing in terms of it's almost like writing an essay and not being fixed on what the point of the essay is. So I think that does it. All right. So thank you for your questions, guys. Paul, Willie, Elizabeth, and C. Ford. I don't know why I turned you into C. Ford instead of, I think that's what you do on your own. All right. Well, thank you, guys. And so again, please do keep on subscribing, sharing, liking, and all the rest. And I really do appreciate the donations that come in. I think we are getting some ad stuff. So I think at least my Mr. Producer is getting paid for his work. In the meantime, you guys are hopefully getting a blessing from it. I really hope what I keep hearing is true, that there's a benefit in the work I'm doing. So we're at 340 videos. It's amazing stuff. All right, I'm gonna have somebody live with me. Next week, as sort of a Zoom with somebody. So I hope you can tune into that. And in the meantime, have a great week. Hope you paint their eyes out, as it were. All right, talk to you later.